"Take that jacket off. You're not a soldier." The lieutenant didn't whisper. He wanted everyone to hear, but the woman just looked at him, then sat back down, like she'd heard worse in places with no flags and no rules. She didn't shout, she didn't flinch. She waited. That was the warning. And he missed it. Because all he saw was a sun-faded uniform. He didn't see the ghosted patch. He didn't see the general coming. And when that man showed up, with stars on his chest and fire in his voice, the only sound left in the room was silence. "You didn't ask," she said. Just 4 words, enough to crush an entire ego. But the real twist? It wasn't just her jacket they mocked. It was a unit that doesn't exist on paper, and a story they were never supposed to hear. You're going to want to stay for this. Tell us, where are you watching from today? Hit subscribe. Veteran Biker brings you stories they tried to bury, and don't miss tomorrow's drop. We're just getting started. The first thing people noticed was the jacket. Not her calm stride or the quiet precision in how she moved, not even the silver-threaded hair tied in a military bun, but that old, worn field jacket. It had been through more dust storms than drills, more combat zones than classrooms. The left shoulder bore a faded shadow of a unit patch, frayed beyond recognition, clinging to the fabric like a ghost of something no one could name. To most of the young soldiers hurrying in and out of the depot at Fort Branton, it looked like junkyard surplus, something picked off a rack in a vintage store by someone desperate to pretend they'd once served. And so the assumptions began. It was 7:48 on a Monday when Sergeant Dana Weller stepped out of a beat-up Chevy Silverado, the Georgia heat already laying its claim on everything it touched. Fort Branton buzzed with its usual cadence of barking NCOs, diesel coughs, and the scent of overbrewed coffee spilling from the chow hall. She carried no rank on her collar now, just a clipboard, a hydration rig, and an authorization form. It was supposed to be a simple pickup for the weekend training she'd volunteered to help with. No pay, no orders, just experience requested. Dana had answered out of restlessness more than duty, because idle hands and a silent phone didn't sit well with a woman who had spent most of her life organizing chaos. The supply depot had changed since she'd last seen it. Brighter paint, digital systems, younger faces. But the air still smelled like cardboard, duct tape, and old camo. Dana moved through the entry without fanfare, her boots quiet against the concrete, her eyes scanning exits automatically. Habit. The moment she stepped inside, the air shifted. Not for her. She noticed nothing, but 3 second lieutenants by the hydration system section certainly did. Lieutenant Gavin Cole was the first to nudge his friend. A tall man with a kind of polished haircut that screamed, "R.O.C.O. Check out that jacket," he muttered, smirking. "Did Halloween come early?" Lieutenant Derek Voss followed his line of sight, raising an eyebrow. "That thing's a Goodwill special." She probably found it in her attic next to her uncle's old medals. The third, Lieutenant Aidan Blake, chuckled, louder than necessary. "Nah, you know how these people are. Slap on a faded patch, throw in a fake scar, and suddenly they're combat experienced. Watch, she'll be telling stories about secret missions in countries that don't exist." Dana heard none of it, or perhaps chose not to. Her eyes remained fixed on the checklist in her hands. Boots, size 8, hydration rig, gloves, utility tape, nothing fancy, just the kind of gear that kept soldiers from passing out or bleeding out, depending on the scenario. She approached the counter calmly. Behind it stood Private Shane Emery, who looked barely old enough to have graduated high school, let alone boot camp. He was pecking at the digital requisition screen like it might explode. When he saw her approach, he straightened, blinking fast. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Got your forms?" Dana handed over the printed documents. Emery scanned them, frowning as the screen blinked red. System's flagging this," he murmured, mostly to himself. Says missing unit code. That's correct, Dana replied, voice even. I'm a civilian volunteer, logistics support. Cleared through Battalion 6. The private hesitated. Right, it's just... The system doesn't let me override without a supervisor's PIN, and Sergeant Blake's at briefing till 0900. No problem. I can wait. Before she could even turn toward the bench, a voice chimed in behind her. Smooth, too casual to be polite. Want me to take a look at that? Lieutenant Gavin Cole had crossed the room with a swagger only someone fresh out of OCs could muster. He plucked the paperwork out of the air before Private Emery could stop him, holding it up like he was checking for counterfeit bills. Happens all the time, he said to no one in particular. Fake forms, expired codes. Anybody with Photoshop and a printer can make these days. Dana said nothing. She simply stepped back, moved to the bench near the exit, and sat down. The metal groaned beneath her weight. The air conditioner overhead blasted directly onto her shoulders, emphasizing the chill in more ways than one. Behind her, the lieutenants huddled like students preparing to present a group project on military fraud. One had his boot on a chair, another was already chuckling over his energy drink. She probably tells people she was Special Forces, Blake whispered. Or Task Force Delta Ghost. Ever heard of Echo Ridge? Voss mocked, making a spooky noise. Don't forget the classic, Cole added. If I tell you, I'd have to kill you. They laughed, loud enough to be heard, not loud enough to be blamed. Dana kept her eyes on the clipboard in her lap. The pen in her hand didn't move. She wasn't taking notes, wasn't pretending to be busy. She was simply waiting, like she had waited in extraction zones, like she had waited for medevac birds that never came, like she had waited for politicians to make decisions from thousands of miles away while her team bled out on sand she couldn't pronounce. The cold air pressed against her shoulders, but the heat beneath her skin stayed constant. Not anger, not embarrassment, just something ancient, familiar. The kind of silence that came when dignity was all you had left, and no one around could recognize it. Aidan Blake wandered past her bench, a smug smirk curling his lip. He made a point to glance down at her boots. Old, broken-in, military issue from a time when he was still trying to get a date to prom. Just saying, he muttered loud enough for others to hear. There are regs about uniforms, even for civilians, especially when they don't belong to you. Dana didn't answer, didn't flinch, just let the silence absorb the comment like a sponge. Across the depot, a forklift beeped as it reversed behind a stack of MREs. Someone argued in the background about a miscounted tent shipment. The normal hum of military logistics continued, as if the tension pooling in one corner of the room didn't matter. Private Emery stole glances at the bench, the printed form still trembling slightly in his hand. He knew something wasn't right. He wasn't stupid. But protocol chained his instincts and rank bound his confidence. He looked like a man who wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but couldn't decide whether it would make things better or worse. The bench was cold. Dana's back ached from an old helicopter crash in the Anbar Hills. Her left knee pulsed in rhythm with the ache in her shoulder. Shrapnel had its own memory. It liked to return on humid mornings like this. Then, a sound, not loud, not unusual, just footsteps, slow, deliberate, precise. The kind that made people stop moving without knowing why. The three lieutenants were still talking when the footsteps neared. They didn't notice him until the ceramic clink of 4 coffee mugs set down on the adjacent supply table interrupted their flow. Steam rose from the cups, curling into the cold depot air. And standing beside them, not looking at them, was a man built like the stories they told in briefings but never dared to believe. Brigadier General Rourke Hale didn't speak, he didn't glare, he didn't correct. He simply picked up a 5th cup, black, untouched, and turned away. His fatigues weren't parade clean, his boots were dusty. His sleeves rolled to reveal old tattoos that didn't come from bar nights but from blood oaths in places without names. Lieutenant Voss's jaw moved, but no sound came out. "Was that?" Blake whispered, eyes wide. Cole swallowed hard. "That's General Hale, Pathfinder Recon, Task Force 71. He briefed the Joint Chiefs last fall." "No way," Voss murmured. "He's the guy from Crimson." "Shh." But the general was already walking, steady, unhurried, toward the bench in the corner, the bench where Dana Weller hadn't moved an inch. Private Emery stood frozen. The depot staff fell into a hush. The only sound was the distant hum of an industrial fan and the hard clack of Hale's boots across the concrete. He stopped just behind Dana. A shadow fell across her shoulder. Her posture changed just slightly. A subtle shift in spine, in breath. Not fear, not tension, recognition. The general spoke, his voice low but cutting through the depot like steel. "That patch on your shoulder." 3 lieutenants froze. Dana didn't turn, didn't blink. He asked again, softer but deeper, "Where did you serve?" Dana's voice was calm, measured, as though she were reciting coordinates burned into memory. "Started in Unbar, finished on Black Ridge." The coffee in the general's hand didn't move, but something in his stance did, just a fraction. Enough for those who understood battlefield language. Behind them, silence spread like fire, and the depot, for the first time that morning, went completely still. Dana still hadn't moved. The heat of General Hale's presence radiated behind her like a pressure front, but her body remained steady, eyes fixed on the clipboard resting on her lap. She didn't need to answer again. She already had. And that answer, those few simple words, had rearranged the air in the depot like a dropped grenade. But across the room, the lieutenants were scrambling to recover. Cole was the first to laugh. A brittle, performative chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on," he said too loudly, nudging Blake with a stiff elbow. She could have Googled those names. You know, Anbar, Black Ridge. Anyone with half a memory of military history could throw out some buzzwords. Blake nodded, still pale. Yeah, and that patch isn't even real. I mean, what the hell even is that? It's not in any unit catalogue I've ever seen." Voss added, "Probably a knockoff, some custom thing she got off a vendor online. You can get fake seal patches off Etsy. I've seen them." The 3 men huddled like rats in a sinking corner, trying to rebuild the swagger that had evaporated the second Hale walked past, but their voices carried. The depot wasn't loud anymore. The room had grown quiet, observant. The sound of their deflections echoed just enough to matter. "You ever notice," Cole continued, "these fake vets always do the same thing? They stay quiet, act mysterious, throw out some scars and silence, and hope no one calls them on it. It's all part of the act, like cosplay, but they want a free meal out of it, or a standing ovation," Blake said. "They love when people say, 'Thank you for your service.' It's like performance art, and you can't question them, right? Because if you do, suddenly you're the jerk." Voss made a face. "We had a guy come to our ROTC banquet last year claiming he was Force Recon, said he was in something called Black Echo or Echo Phantom, I don't know. Told this wild story about pulling intel from a burning compound in Syria. Turns out he'd been motor pool in Nebraska." They laughed again. Not as loud, not as confident, but enough to draw a few glances from the depot staff still pretending to organize crates of gloves and boots. The chuckles were sharp, defensive, carrying the tension of men who had started a game they no longer controlled. Private Emery shifted behind the counter, his eyes darting between the lieutenants and the general, who now stood beside Dana like a sentinel. The paperwork still sat on the edge of the register, untouched. He looked like he wanted to vanish. And Dana? She still hadn't moved. Her fingers rested lightly against the metal edge of the clipboard, her posture unchanged, but something flickered behind her expression now, a subtle adjustment in her jaw. Not pain, not defiance, just memory. They had no idea what they were doing, not yet. But that was about to change. Blake took a slow sip from his energy drink, leaning back against a stack of ration crates like he owned the depot. Honestly, I don't blame them. Some of those folks get out and can't let go. They miss the respect, so they come back here, wearing half a uniform and waiting for someone to salute them. Right? Cole added. She's probably got a whole closet of those jackets. Different patches for different stories. One for the Gulf, one for Iraq, one for whatever Black Ridge even is. Swap 'em out depending on the crowd. She hasn't said anything though, Voss noted, frowning slightly. Not even once. Exactly, Cole replied. That's how they get you. The silence sells it, makes you fill in the gaps. You look at the scars and the stare and think, damn, maybe she really did something, but it's all theater. She knows what she's doing. Voss glanced over at Dana, something uncertain flickering in his expression, but he quickly buried it under a shrug. Still, Blake said, quieter now. Why would General Hale, go straight to her like that? Didn't even stop to check in with anyone, just walked right up like he recognized her, Voss finished. Cole scoffed. Come on! That guy's been in every theater for the last 20 years. He probably sees ghosts everywhere. That patch could have reminded him of someone else. The laughter had dried up, replaced by a forced normalcy, the kind of tone soldiers used when they were trying to convince themselves more than anyone else. They'd gone too far, and some part of them knew it, but retreat wasn't an option, not yet. Pride had its own gravity. Across the room, a supply clerk coughed awkwardly. A staff sergeant paused mid-conversation near the entrance, eyes darting between Dana and the lieutenants. The room had not forgotten. Dana didn't need to say anything. Her silence had become heavier than their voices. The clipboard now rested beside her, forgotten. Her eyes were open but distant, as if viewing a scene no one else could see. Maybe she was remembering something, or maybe she was simply waiting for the moment to pass. Not because she couldn't speak, but because she didn't need to. In her world, real stories didn't beg to be told. They left marks in other ways. In knees that ached in the rain, in friends whose names were etched into cold stone, in moments like this when silence was the only thing left with weight. Blake finally looked away first. Then Cole. Voss lingered a second longer before following suit. The three officers dispersed, their movements sharp and purposeful, like they had somewhere important to be. Anywhere but here. Behind Dana, General Hale remained still, watching. Not her. Them. Private Shane Emery's fingers hovered over the keyboard like he was disarming a live mine. The requisition screen blinked red again, displaying the same unhelpful message, manual approval required. He chewed the inside of his cheek, glancing nervously at Dana, then at the forms she had provided. Everything about them looked legitimate. Official letterhead, correct formatting, even a digital seal from Battalion 6. But she had no unit code, no active assignment. And the system didn't like anomalies. I'm really sorry, ma'am, he said finally, voice tight. I know it's all here, but without a current assignment, the system won't release gear unless someone with override clearance inputs it manually. And, he hesitated, already cringing, and Sergeant Blake's still in the briefing. He's the only one with the override login for civilians. Dana nodded once, no emotion visible on her face. I understand. I can ask him to come as soon as he's out. It shouldn't be more than an hour. That's fine. She reached to take her papers back when a shadow slid across the counter. Lieutenant Gavin Cole reappeared with the same arrogant gait, hands clasped behind his back like a tour guide ready to point out the flaws in a museum exhibit. Still here? He asked lightly, eyes scanning the screen over Emery's shoulder. Trouble with the system? Emery stiffened, caught between the rank on Cole's chest and the unease in his gut. "Yes, sir." The system flagged her requisition. "She's a civilian volunteer cleared for weekend logistics, but there's no unit code to input. Needs override." Cole gave a small ah of understanding, then turned to Dana with a smirk. "Mind if I take another look at that authorization?" He didn't wait for her to answer. He lifted the forms again, holding them up to the depot's harsh fluorescent lights like he expected to find secret ink or forgery marks. He turned them over slowly, dramatically for effect. "These things are getting more convincing," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "You'd be surprised what folks try to pass off. Expired waivers, Photoshop jobs. We had one guy last month come in with a document signed by a colonel who's been retired since 2012. Private Emery shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the seal looks..." "Sure, looks is one thing," Cole interrupted smoothly, "but official verification's another. Anybody with an old PDF and a color printer can make something that looks the part." Dana said nothing. She didn't even blink. She merely watched him with the dispassionate calm of someone who'd survived worse than bureaucracy and boys in pressed uniforms. "You know how it is," Cole continued, now speaking to no one in particular. "The system has to be careful. Can't just hand out tactical gear to every weekend warrior who shows up with a story and a patch." This time his voice carried further toward the other soldiers in the room, as if inviting their silent agreement. Dana simply placed her hands behind her back and stepped away from the counter. Without argument, without rebuttal. She walked over to the same cold metal bench and sat again, her back straight, her eyes forward. She'd waited through worse, and she knew what always came next. The bench was cold, pressed against the cinder block wall like a reminder of how institutional indifference could be both literal and symbolic. Dana didn't mind. She had sat on worse. Aircraft ramps slick with oil, cargo bays vibrating with rotors, desert rock still warm from a night of incoming fire. This metal slab was nothing. She folded her hands in her lap and exhaled through her nose, slow and steady. The ache in her shoulder stirred again, a dull echo of the past, but she didn't move to rub it. Pain, like silence, had become familiar company. A few feet away, Lieutenant Derek Voss strolled by, arms folded, eyes trailing across her with performative curiosity. He stopped just short of her bench and made a show of examining her boots, the worn but serviceable kind that had crossed continents without ceremony. "You know," he said casually, addressing no one in particular, "there are actual regulations about uniform appearance. Even for civilians, can't just wear whatever looks military and expect it to mean something." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. His words weren't meant to correct. They were meant to dominate, the same way some officers learned to establish pecking orders without raising their voices, assert doubt, pose as helpful, let condescension do the rest. Dana didn't flinch. She didn't even turn her head. Her stillness unnerved him more than if she'd shouted. Behind them, the depot continued its morning rhythm. Supplies rattled onto rolling carts. Keypads beeped. A private wheeled out a stack of camelbacks without noticing he was trailing Velcro strips across the aisle. The world kept turning, but around the bench there was a pocket of tension that refused to dissipate. A veteran sitting still, a rankless figure in a rank-worshipping space, and three officers too young to recognize the weight pressing down on the room had nothing to do with them, and everything to do with the silence they'd stirred awake. Voss rejoined his friends near the hydration racks, where Cole was half-heartedly explaining why old-style ID lanyards were a giveaway of stolen valor. "I mean, come on," Cole said, holding up his CAC like it was a badge of honor. "Who even uses paper credentials anymore? That's like pre-9/11 nonsense." "She probably pulled it out of a museum," Blake added with a snicker. "She probably belongs in one," Voss said, regaining his nerve. More laughter, but this time it was thinner, less sharp. It didn't ripple through the depot the way it had earlier. Too many people had heard the general say something. Too many were wondering why he hadn't walked past like everyone else. Dana sat unmoving, but her presence was no longer dismissed. It had become a question, a quiet contradiction to everything the lieutenants had been raised to believe about appearance, protocol, and honor, and while they joked, while they tried to re-establish control, they didn't notice the ripple traveling outward. Not yet. But it had begun. Near the vending machines, the three lieutenants regrouped, this time with an audience. Another junior officer had wandered over from the camo netting section, lured by the laughter and low-stakes cruelty. Even Warrant Officer Adam Brenner, a stocky man with thinning hair and the air of someone who had seen enough to be cynical, leaned on a supply shelf nearby, arms crossed, a smirk forming as he listened. Lieutenant Blake had taken center stage now, his boot propped up theatrically on a nearby chair as he launched into his next round of commentary. "I'm telling you," he said, waving his energy drink for emphasis, "they crawl out of every military documentary. Saw Black Hawk down once and suddenly they're talking about night raids in Fallujah." She probably tells people she ran recon on bin Laden's cave in high school. Laughter flared. The junior officer chuckled while Brenner shook his head slowly, clearly amused. "You see that patch?" Cole said, pointing with his thumb. "So faded it's basically a rumor. That's the thing with fake units, always just enough detail to make you think you missed a briefing. Wings, claws, maybe a sword, some made-up death squad name like Phantom Company or Ghost Response. Sounds just edgy enough to make civilians nod along." Voss jumped in, eyes gleaming now that the attention had returned. "And have you noticed how they always have scars? Always, but no actual story. Or if there is one, it's conveniently classified. You ask what happened, and it's all 'I can't say, national security.' Or my favorite," Blake said, adopting a gravelly voice, "if I told you I'd have to kill you. Because sure, that's what real operatives say while waiting for their hydration packs." Even Brenner snorted at that one. "I had a guy like that in my ROC class," he said. "Said his dad was Delta, showed up to the ball wearing medals I'd never seen. Turns out the old man was motor pool. They always think nobody's going to check." The circle of laughter tightened. It was no longer just mockery, it was ritual. They were reinforcing each other, weaving a fiction where they were protectors of authenticity, and Dana Weller was a parasite feeding on unearned respect. Each jab made the others bolder. "She probably gets dinner discounts off that jacket," Voss added. "Sits at the bar, waits for someone to ask about the patch, then drops a line like, 'Can't talk about it, still under contract.' And the best part?" Cole said, his grin wide now. "No one challenges it, because if you do, you're the one being disrespectful. It's brilliant, really. A scam with built-in immunity." They all laughed again, but this time not everyone joined. Near the back of the depot, a young corporal restocking trauma kits paused for a moment, his expression caught between discomfort and uncertainty. He glanced toward Dana on the bench, then back at the laughing officers. He didn't say anything, but he didn't smile either. The banter had taken on a rhythm now, feeding itself, tightening into something uglier, a kind of pack behavior where each joke made the next one feel more acceptable. What had started as mockery had become performance, a show designed not to entertain but to enforce hierarchy. They weren't just laughing at Dana, they were reminding everyone in earshot who held power and who didn't. Brenner leaned in slightly, nodding toward Dana's shoulder. "That patch doesn't even show up on Google," he said with a hint of smugness. "You can't even reverse image search it. That's the biggest red flag of all. The units that claim to never exist. Like she stitched it together in an arts and crafts meeting for ghost battalions." Voss grinned. "What do you want to bet there's a basement full of medals and shadow boxes in her apartment? All with made-up citations. Operation Fire Phoenix, Battle of Ravens Drop, Some Tom Clancy-sounding nonsense. She probably watches The Unit on repeat and takes notes, Blake said. The laughter came again, this time joined by a few others on the periphery, supply clerks, a young mechanic. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew which direction the wind was blowing, and it felt easier to laugh than question what was really happening. Dana still hadn't moved. She sat exactly as she had before, her spine straight, her hands calm, her expression unreadable. She wasn't pretending not to hear, she simply chose not to acknowledge. And in doing so, she created something the others couldn't name, a silence too disciplined to mock. What none of them realized, not yet, was that she'd heard it all before. Maybe not the exact words, but the tone, the assumption, the entitlement. It was the same voice that questioned whether women should be in combat units, the same laugh that dismissed years of service because it didn't come with a parade or a press release, the same sneer that doubted what didn't fit into their tight, clean boxes. Blake took one final jab. The real giveaway is how they just sit there. Don't argue. Don't fight back. Just let the room do the work for them. Let the mystery fill in the gaps. Let you feel bad for even wondering. That's the move. She's been playing the long con, Cole said. Bet she doesn't even need the gear, just came to be seen. Classic. This time the laughter was quieter, not gone, but different. A few soldiers had stopped pretending to stock shelves. One of the depot's logistics officers stood motionless by a printer, staring in Dana's direction with a faint frown. And still she sat, unmoved, unapologetic. Not because she couldn't respond, but because she knew what silence meant, when it wasn't weakness, when it was power, when it was memory. And somewhere deep in the depot, a signal had already been sent. A ripple, and it was moving towards something they weren't ready for. A clipboard snapped somewhere near the supply lockers. The sharp kind of snap that didn't belong to equipment but to authority. Sergeant First Class Teresa Lamb, the depot's acting admin NCO, stepped out of her office with a furrowed brow and a folder under one arm. Her gaze swept the room, narrowed as it landed on Dana, still seated at the far bench. "Ma'am," she called, with a stiffness born of protocol, not invitation. "Can I see you in the front office for a moment?" Dana rose without a word, gathered the clipboard and her paperwork, and followed the sergeant. The lieutenants fell silent as she passed, eyes tracking her movement with a strange blend of triumph and unease, like kids who had tattled but weren't sure how far things would go. Inside the cramped office, Sergeant Lamb gestured toward the seat across from her desk. "You understand, ma'am," she began, flipping through the forms Dana had already submitted. "This is just standard. We've had some incidents recently. Verifications are tight, and our chain of custody on equipment has to be airtight. I'm not saying there's an issue, but without a current CAC or active clearance ID, I'm not asking for anything outside protocol," Dana replied evenly. "I submitted my authorization through the appropriate channels." Lamb nodded. "I see that. You've got a Battalion 6 signature, and it matches the files. The problem is, that's all digital, and some folks have been getting creative with signatures and digital seals." Dana tilted her head slightly. "You think I faked a battalion-level request for duct tape and a hydration pack?" The sergeant blinked. "I'm not accusing you of anything. But until I get verbal confirmation from Battalion 6, I'm told to delay issuing gear." Dana didn't argue. She simply leaned back in the chair, letting the seconds stretch. She'd been through interrogations that started more polite than this. At least this one came with air conditioning. Back out in the depot, the whispers had started, not from the officers this time, but from others. Word had spread fast that Dana had been called into the office. Not arrested, not detained, but that was enough. When you wore a uniform, even a faded one, and got pulled aside, it meant something. People noticed, and someone had recorded. A blurry video was already making rounds on the base group chat. 30 seconds of Dana standing at the counter with Lieutenant Cole beside her, waving the authorization paper like a smoking gun. The audio was scratchy, but the words "Weekend Warrior" and "Fake Override" were clear enough. No context, no explanation, just the implication. It didn't matter that she hadn't raised her voice. Didn't matter that she had waited patiently. The video had already been reshared 3 times before she'd even left the office. At the barracks, a corporal watched it between spoonfuls of cereal. "Another stolen valor case?" he muttered. In the motor pool, a mechanic paused mid-repair. "Didn't we have one of these last month? Some guy with airborne wings on a denim vest?" The comments poured in like water through a cracked hull. Who still wears patches like that? She looks like she's cosplaying her dad. Let me guess, classified missions. LOL. By the time Dana stepped out of the office again, the damage had already spread far beyond the depot walls, and she hadn't said a single word. As Dana stepped back onto the depot floor, a different kind of silence greeted her. Not the tense hush of earlier, but the anticipatory quiet of people pretending not to watch. Conversations faltered and redirected. Soldiers glanced up and away too quickly. The sound of boots scuffing on concrete, of scanner beeps and printer hums couldn't mask the shift in tone. She walked back to the same bench and sat, just as she had before, calm, unrushed. In her hands was nothing but the same clipboard and the same authorization packet that had started this spiral. But now, it wasn't just the lieutenants who watched her, it was the room. Near the back, 2 supply specialists leaned against a shelving unit, eyes flicking from their phones to Dana. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and National Guard patch, whispered something to the other, then laughed under his breath. Their laughter didn't travel far, but the weight of it found its way to her anyway. "She's all over the group thread," one said. "That clip's been shared 8 times already. Someone even put a filter on it with Mission Impossible music." Dana heard it. She didn't react. Her breathing stayed level, her posture unchanged. It was almost impressive, the discipline. But it only fed the myth, because silence to them still meant mystery. And mystery, in the hands of cynics, was always a blank canvas to paint the worst on. "You think she'll get kicked off base?" someone murmured near the uniform wall. "No way," someone else replied. "They'll just let it blow over." She probably knows someone, or claimed PTSD. That always muddies the waters. Across the room, Lieutenant Cole had regrouped with Blake and Voss. Their laughter had faded to low, guarded exchanges, but their expressions still brimmed with smug certainty. They had done what they set out to do: expose the imposter, reassert the chain of respect, the kind that came with clean credentials and unblemished timelines. Dana adjusted her posture slightly, and her jacket shifted as she settled her clipboard beside her. That's when it happened. A contractor, civilian logistics staff, maybe mid-30s, dressed in a worn baseball cap and moving crates of ammunition, paused mid-stride. His eyes had landed almost accidentally on her left shoulder. He stopped, not a stutter step, not a casual glance. He froze, his gaze locked on the ghost of the patch stitched into the fabric, frayed and nearly colorless, but just visible enough if the light hit it right. What he saw wasn't something you found on surplus shelves. It wasn't part of any recruiting brochure or veteran ball cap. It was something else entirely, something not supposed to exist. His eyes widened. He looked again as if confirming it wasn't a trick of the light. Then, without a word, he turned fast and disappeared into the rear loading area, pushing the handcart faster than his job required. The movement was too sharp, too focused to be random. Dana didn't turn to follow him, but she had noticed. Just barely the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, not satisfaction. Recognition. A signal had been sent, and now the ripple would become a wave. The next hour unfolded like a quiet storm across Fort Branton. The video had gone from group chats to division-level message boards. Someone cropped it down to 15 seconds. Another overlaid subtitles that exaggerated Lieutenant Cole's remarks, painting Dana as an elderly wannabe who'd shown up demanding gear and respect. By the time the clip made it to the Motorpool's TV lounge, it had already collected a dozen sarcastic comments and 3 snide gifs. Every repost, every reaction strengthened the same narrative, that the woman in the worn jacket was just another civilian reaching for glory she hadn't earned. At the base PX, a young specialist looked up from his lunch as the video played on his buddy's phone. "Did you see the part where the officer holds up her form?" he asked. Dude had that look like he'd just caught a fraud red-handed. "Classic fake vet energy," his friend muttered, shaking his head. "I mean, she didn't even try to look legit. Who shows up with a patch you can't Google?" Even in the admin building, where protocol usually kept gossip at bay, someone had forwarded the clip to a Major's aide just in case. Rumors didn't need oxygen at Branton. They just needed friction. And Dana's silence had provided plenty. Meanwhile, back in the depot, the atmosphere had curdled into something sour and uncertain. The lieutenants, once energized by their impromptu comedy routine, now spoke quieter, with more glances over their shoulders. Something had shifted, and not just because of the clip's virality, it was the contractor. The man who'd vanished after glimpsing Dana's shoulder had yet to return. No explanation, no radio call, just gone, and for some reason, that fact had settled over the room like fog. Warrant Officer Brenner, who had laughed the loudest earlier, now stood silently near the tactical gear cage, his phone forgotten in his hand. He kept looking toward the back hallway, where the contractor had disappeared. His brows pinched together. He wasn't smiling anymore. Private Emery stayed behind the counter, fingers hovering near the terminal, uncertain if he should keep checking the screen or pretend he was doing something else. He had overheard some of the depot staff whispering about the man who left, that he used to work in munitions convoys overseas, had a clearance level nobody understood, and never reacted to anything. Until today. "Did you see how fast he moved?" Someone said quietly, like he recognized something. "What was on her jacket?" another replied. "I thought it was just sun-bleached." A senior clerk stepped closer to the bench where Dana sat, pretending to check inventory tags. He squinted at her shoulder, eyes narrowing, lips pressing into a thin line. Whatever he saw, he didn't comment. Dana remained still. But now the stares were different, less mocking, more searching. The depot's air, once thick with sarcasm and certainty, had shifted to something more brittle, like glass under pressure. The kind of tension that doesn't announce itself, but is felt in the way conversations shorten, the way footsteps soften, the way even the coffee machine gurgled more quietly, as if wary of interrupting something it didn't understand. Dana hadn't changed position. She sat exactly as she had before, back straight, hands resting on her lap, the same worn clipboard resting beside her. But now, each passing second seemed to magnify her presence. She was no longer the subject of a joke. She had become the question itself. Lieutenant Blake, still gripping his half-empty energy drink, tried to reignite the mood. "You'd think if she was real, someone would have vouched for her by now," he said, forcing a shrug. Nobody stepping forward. Cole, less certain than before, muttered, "Maybe they're waiting for confirmation. Could be she just looks like someone." Voss didn't reply. Brenner finally spoke up, voice low. "She's not wearing that jacket to impress anyone, not with the way it looks." "What's that supposed to mean?" Blake asked. "It means," Brenner said slowly, "people who fake it usually go all in. Clean medals, shiny boots, crisp patches, the works. That jacket, it's not for show, it survived things." For the first time, the lieutenants had no response. Behind them, a corporal emerged from the back hallway, walking briskly toward the front of the depot, but not before casting a long glance in Dana's direction. He didn't say anything, just nodded. almost imperceptibly, and kept going. Private Emery noticed it. So did Sergeant Lamb, now watching through the glass of her office window. Another minute passed, then another. A mechanic entered, sweaty and smelling of motor oil, carrying a crate of repair kits. As he passed Dana's bench, he slowed. His eyes scanned the faded outline on her shoulder, the barely there shadow of the patch, and something in his posture changed. He didn't stop, didn't speak, but his head dipped slightly as he walked by. It wasn't a greeting, it was recognition. Outside the depot, the sun had climbed higher, casting longer shadows through the open garage bay. The air was thick, the kind that made fabric cling and tempers rise, but inside, the heat had become something else entirely, a kind of collective discomfort that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the feeling of being watched, not by Dana, by the silence they had created, by the weight of assumptions left hanging too long, by the sudden awareness that maybe, just maybe, they had gotten it wrong, and that if they hadn't just disrespected a woman in an old jacket, they disrespected something much larger, something that was about to speak. The sound was subtle, a soft clink of ceramic on metal, but in the weighted silence of the depot, it cracked like thunder. A tray of coffee mugs landed on the checkout counter with quiet precision. 4 military-issue cups filled with steam and silence, arranged with care. No one had seen him enter, no doors had banged, no boots had echoed. But suddenly, he was there. Brigadier General Rourke Hale stood at the front of the depot, sleeves rolled high on his forearms, tattoos faded with age and salt, not style. One arm bore the arrowhead of a Pathfinder unit, the other a cascade of deployment bands that mapped decades of service like a living archive. His boots were scuffed, his stance effortless. There was no ceremony in his presence, and yet every person in the room felt it like gravity. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up a 5th cup, black, untouched, and walked slow and steady toward the back of the depot. Toward her, Dana didn't turn, but something in her shifted, slightly, the way a soldier straightens at the scent of cordite, the way instincts remember things the brain tries to forget. The general approached, stopped just behind her. Then, in a voice that didn't need to rise to command, he said, "That patch on your shoulder." Every head turned. The lieutenants froze mid-breath. Dana didn't move. "Where did you serve?" he asked. She answered without hesitation, her voice low even but carrying. "Started in Anbar, finished at Black Ridge." There was no rustle of confusion. No one asked what those names meant. But something in the way she said them, like coordinates on a map etched in bone, sent a current through the room. General Hale stood silent for a heartbeat longer, then stepped around the bench to face her directly. His eyes scanned the faint remnant of the unit patch. No longer thread, just suggestion. It looked like wings once, or maybe talons, or both. Most would dismiss it as a design lost to the sun, but not him. His jaw tightened, his voice dropped lower, into something more personal. Echo Response didn't have a public roster, he said. Not to the room, to her. Most people in the Pentagon don't even think it existed. Dana finally looked up. "It existed for 7 years, she replied, then half got folded into phantom elements. The rest were debriefed into silence. A stillness fell over the depot that no one could break. General Hale nodded once, like confirming something he already suspected. Crimson Ridge, October 2011. The public file called it Operation Ghostwalker. That wasn't the real name, Dana said softly. No, Hale agreed. It wasn't. He turned suddenly, his voice rising for the first time. I need whoever's in charge of this facility now. Private Emery jumped like someone had fired a weapon. He dropped the scanner, which clattered to the floor. Sergeant Lamb emerged from her office at full stride, followed closely by a supply chief and a red-faced junior warrant officer. The lieutenants, Cole, Blake and Voss stood like statues near the hydration aisle, their mouths slightly parted, eyes wide. "Sergeant Major Gilson," Hale barked before anyone could speak. A tree trunk of a man appeared from the rear hallway as if conjured by the name. His presence rivaled Hale's in size if not rank, and his expression shifted the moment he saw the general's face. "Sir, this is Sergeant First Class Dana Weller," Hale said. She served with the 81 Stones Echo Response Group under Joint Task Command, Black Ridge, Anbar, and the original Red Sands Corridor. Triple Black Protocol, minimal records, zero press, full operational deniability. Gilson's eyes dropped to Dana's shoulder, his jaw working as he tried to read something that barely existed. "That unit ran deep intercept," Hale continued. "And I know it existed because on October 15th, 2011, when my convoy was boxed in on Crimson Ridge with 3 vehicles full of wounded and no air support, it was Echo Response that drew enemy fire away from our position and gave us the corridor to extract. Without them, I wouldn't be standing here." The depot wasn't just quiet now, it was reverent. Sergeant Major Gilson straightened, his voice crisp. "Understood, sir." "Effective immediately," Hale said, turning to face the depot staff. "She is owed full cooperation and full respect. She gets what she came for. No forms, no waiting, no questions. That's a direct order from a flag officer." "Yes, sir," Gilson barked, already moving toward the back with purpose. A supply specialist darted after him without being told, nearly tripping over a box of MREs in her rush. Lieutenant Cole looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He stood stiffly, his gaze flicking between Dana and General Hale, lips slightly parted as if trying to summon a defense. Nothing came. Lieutenant Blake shifted his weight awkwardly, the swagger drained from his stance. His half-empty energy drink now seemed absurd in his hand. Voss said nothing at all. He had turned pale, eyes locked on the faded outline of Dana's patch, as if trying to reassemble history from threads. Behind the counter, Private Emery swallowed hard. His fingers hovered over the requisition terminal. Hale turned and walked with Dana toward the front, the path cleared for them like a tide receding from stone. At the counter, the private stood so straight he looked like he might tip over. His hands flew across the terminal as if each key press could redeem the delay. He didn't look up, didn't speak. The red alert box on the screen flickered, and then, with a few override codes supplied by Gilson, vanished. "You're all set, ma'am," Emery said, voice tight with effort. "Everything's approved." An aide hustled forward with a sealed gear pack. Boots, hydration system, gloves, all brand new, all regulation, all respectfully placed on the counter without a word. Dana nodded once. "Appreciate it. Not doing you a favor, Sergeant," General Hale replied quietly. "I'm correcting an oversight." At that moment, Lieutenant Cole stepped forward, hat in his hands, his movements small, diminished. He stopped a respectful distance away, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, his voice tight, "I want to apologize for earlier. I didn't realize—" Dana turned to face him fully, not angry, but not lenient either. "You didn't ask," she said. 2 words, sharp, clean, no venom, just truth. He lowered his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a second longer, then added, "We all come up through something, Lieutenant. Maybe next time ask first." "Yes, ma'am," he repeated, with more weight behind it this time. General Hale offered Dana one final nod and stepped back. The depot, though slowly returning to motion, had fundamentally changed. Soldiers moved with more deliberation. Jokes were silenced mid-thought. The ones who had laughed now glanced over their shoulders, unsure of the world they'd just been forced to reconsider. As Dana adjusted the strap of the hydration pack across her shoulder, the room felt like it was holding its breath. And then, with no ceremony, she walked out, past the counter, past the officers, through the steel-framed doorway into the heat of the Georgia morning. But as she crossed the depot threshold, boots crunching against the gravel outside, a quiet began to build behind her, not of mockery, not of doubt, but of silent, belated recognition, not just for her, but for every name never written on a wall, for every mission no one was allowed to remember, for every patch too faded to be found in a catalogue, but burned into the memory of those who had survived because it once existed. She didn't need a salute. She'd already been seen. The depot doors hissed closed behind her, but Dana didn't look back. The sun had climbed higher now, washing the lot in a golden heat that shimmered off the pavement. She walked slowly, boots crunching on gravel, the hydration pack slung over one shoulder, the rest of the gear tucked under one arm. It wasn't heavy, not compared to the weight she'd been carrying for years. She made it halfway across the lot when the footsteps joined her. Not hurried, not hesitant, just steady, measured. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. Brigadier General Rourke Hale fell into step beside her without a word, as if they'd been doing this every morning for years. Like patrol partners on a road that no longer existed on any map, they walked for a long moment in silence. "I heard they folded Echo into Suck Red," Hale said at last, voice casual. Dana nodded. "Parts of it. The rest of us got filtered into Blackside support or buried in debriefing protocols so deep we couldn't even access our own files. They burned everything," he said. "Even the casualty reports," she replied. Hale exhaled, the sound low and heavy. "They tried to erase us. All of you." Dana gave a dry half-smile. "Not the first time they've done that. Probably won't be the last." They stopped near her truck, the old Chevy still baking in the sun, its hood dusted with red Georgia dirt. Hale leaned against the side panel, arms crossed, eyes distant. "There's something you should know," he said. Dana raised an eyebrow. "You remember Black Ridge," he continued. "Obviously, you were there. You ran the diversion through the ravine, held off an entire detachment while we pulled out 3 dozen wounded." She nodded once. "But what you didn't know," Hale said, "is why that convoy was there in the first place." Dana's expression sharpened slightly. "We weren't just extracting wounded, we were transporting a containment module." She blinked. "A module?" "A warhead," Hale said. "Improvised, crude, but viable. Intel said it was low yield, unstable, and being moved through a proxy network. We'd intercepted it and were hauling it to an airstrip for controlled detonation off-site." Dana's face darkened. "They didn't tell us that," she said quietly. "They couldn't," he replied. "Echo response was never briefed. You were bait." She looked away, jaw tight. "You held that line with 8 people," Hale said. "You absorbed fire for almost 10 minutes with no air cover and no armor. You bought us enough time to get that warhead clear, and no one told us what we were buying it for," she said, the words flat. "No," Hale agreed. "They didn't." Dana ran a hand along the hot edge of her tailgate, her fingers tensing. "How many people know?" she asked. 5, Hale said. "Now 6. She turned toward him fully now, the weight of that number settling like stone. "I came here for boots," she said. "Not ghosts, I know. So why are you telling me?" He hesitated. "Then because there's another training exercise next month. Joint operations. We could use someone who's actually seen the cost of silence." Dana narrowed her eyes. "I'm not a trainer." "No," he said. "You're a reckoning." She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. The wind kicked dust across the lot, and the depot behind them remained quiet. For now. Dana leaned against the side of her truck, the sun warming the steel through her jacket. The word reckoning hung between them like smoke, weightless and suffocating all at once. She wasn't sure if it angered her or rang too true to fight. She stared at Hale for a long moment. "Do you know what it's like," she asked finally, "to spend years waking up before dawn? Not because of training, not because of discipline, but because something inside you never came home." He said nothing. He didn't need to. I've tried living normal, she continued, her voice low even. Tried folding laundry like it mattered, rearranging spice racks, walking past folded flags like they weren't mine. Hale's gaze stayed on her, steady. I don't want to train anyone, she said. I don't want to stand in front of a bunch of recruits who think war is a game and tell them how to hold a perimeter. I don't want to watch them laugh at each other's patches like the ones I buried my team with. I know, he said. She laughed once, bitter and quiet. You don't ask someone who's been erased to come back and draw the map. You're wrong, he replied. That's exactly who we ask, because everyone else is drawing cartoons. She turned her head away, staring at the heat rippling off the hood of her truck. You should have told us, she said, almost to herself, about the warhead, about what we were buying time for. You would have gone anyway, he said, wouldn't you? The silence that followed was the answer. She looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred, strong. The kind of hands that remembered weight, recoil, the sharp pull of gauze against blood. Do you know what they said to me in there? She asked after a moment. One of those officers told me there are regulations about uniform appearance, even for civilians. Hale didn't laugh. He only nodded. That jacket held 2 bullet holes, she said. One was patched in the field. The other stopped just shy of my lung because of a radio plate. That patch, they mocked? It's fused to the sleeve because the jacket caught fire when a Humvee flipped near the wire. I haven't removed it. I don't think I ever could. He glanced at the patch, or what was left of it, a ghost outline barely visible in the light. That's why I'm asking you, he said, because those kids don't need a PowerPoint. They need to stand across from someone who bled for real, who carried silence long enough to know when to break it. She exhaled, slow. Then, I'll think about it. That's all I ask. A beat passed between them. Then she reached for the tailgate, popped it open, and placed the gear bag inside with mechanical ease. She closed it gently, like she was sealing a chapter rather than a truck bed. As she moved toward the driver's side, Hale spoke again. They're going to remember you, he said, whether you speak up or not. She paused, one hand on the door. I didn't come here to be remembered, she said. I came for Boots. He gave her a nod, not of dismissal, but of understanding, of respect. Then he turned and walked back toward the depot, his shadow stretching long across the gravel behind him. Dana stood there for a moment longer, watching him go. Then she got in the truck, started the engine, and drove into the heat, not away from anything, but toward something she hadn't yet named. 1 week later, the training field behind Fort Branton looked different, not because of new equipment or command changes, but because of who was standing at the center. Sergeant Dana Weller stood in front of a half-circle of junior officers, her boots planted in red Georgia dirt, a clipboard tucked under one arm. The sun was sharp that morning, bright enough to bleach the paint on the distant Connex containers, but it didn't touch her eyes. She was focused, calm, and unreadable. Lieutenant Gavin Cole stood among the trainees, spine straighter than usual. He wasn't alone. Blake and Voss were there too, not hiding in the back, but not at ease either. None of the jokes from last week made it out of their mouths. Not anymore. No one said it aloud, but the entire camp knew. The woman in the field wasn't just a fill-in instructor. She wasn't there because they were short on staff. She was there because General Rourke Hale had requested her by name. Dana didn't waste time with introductions. The next 48 hours are about failure, she said simply. Controlled failure. We're going to run through scenarios where your plans break, your intel is wrong, and someone doesn't show up on time. We're going to test what happens when command doesn't respond, and when the only thing keeping your team alive is the decision you make under pressure. The air around her was heavy. Not because she raised her voice, she didn't need to. Every word landed like ordnance. You will make mistakes, she continued. That's the point. But here's the thing you won't do. You won't mock the people who made it back wearing scars you can't read. You won't assume that a quiet presence means an empty resume. And you damn sure won't measure someone's worth by how new their gear looks. No one shifted, no one looked away. She scanned the group, her gaze settling briefly on Cole, then on Blake, then on Voss. Not long enough to shame, just long enough to remember. Any questions? There were none. Behind her, a sergeant major overseeing logistics gave a satisfied nod. The base had changed since last week. Quietly, culturally. The video had stopped circulating. Someone had deleted it from the thread. Rumor had it the contractor who vanished had personally spoken with the depot CO, and that a memo had gone out about how veterans were treated on base. Dana turned and began walking the line, correcting stance, checking loadouts, offering notes without tone or condescension. She wasn't looking for apologies, she was looking for readiness. By the end of the first rotation, the officers were sweating hard. One of them, a young woman from out of state, stumbled through a radio report. Dana corrected her positioning with a firm touch and a quiet tip. Breathe before you key the mic. You think clearer when your lungs are full. The woman nodded. Yes, ma'am. Dana almost smiled. Later, as the session ended, Lieutenant Cole approached. He walked slower now, more deliberate. His voice, when it came, was soft. Ma'am, thank you for coming back. Dana regarded him for a long moment. Then she said, next time you see someone with a patch you don't recognize, I'll ask, he finished. She nodded once. Good. Then maybe someone else won't have to carry it alone. As the trainees dispersed, Dana stood alone in the center of the field. Her old jacket, still worn, still patched, flapped gently in the breeze. She hadn't come to be remembered, but she had reminded them what should never be forgotten. She hadn't come to be remembered, but she had reminded them what should never be forgotten. And maybe that's exactly what a true veteran does, not by raising their voice, but by standing still long enough for the truth to speak. Thank you for joining us today on Silent Defenders. If Dana's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you once served with or someone whose silence carried more than words ever could, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen quiet strength misunderstood? We read every message and we'd love to hear your voice. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you won't miss the next story. Because tomorrow, we return with another tale of honor, redemption, and the kind of justice that never needs to shout. And if you're still here, we've picked a few stories you'll want to see next. They're waiting for you right here on the screen. We'll see you there.